So welcome everybody to this Earth Science Women's Network webinar all about the NERC Independent Research Fellowships. This webinar series is two parts. So today is part one on applications, and we have a second webinar in November, which will be all about interviews. So we have five fantastic speakers who joined us today, both from NERC and from people that have panel experience and a current fellow as well. And we're really excited to have everyone here. And we hope that you enjoy it. So a quick bit of structure and to explain what will happen. So we'll have a quick welcome and announcements for about 5 minutes. And then our panelists will introduce themselves very briefly. Then James Box, who's the IRF lead from NERC, will do a quick presentation for 20 minutes, and then we'll go into the panel discussion and Q&A. So I will rename myself to questions at ESWN in a very short amount of time. And if you've got any questions or any tech issues, send them through to me, and I'll try my best to help and also to tell our panelists which questions you have. After the panel discussion, we'll go into breakouts. So these breakouts will be ones that you can move freely between, and you can go and meet whichever speaker you'd like to meet and ask them all your questions. So the other thing is the big disclaimer. So this is an Earth Science Women's Network hosted event with speakers from NERC. So a bit of tech housekeeping. So please remember to abide by Earth Science Women's Network Code of Conduct, which you will all have signed on registration. Please take a moment to go to our website to have a look at this if you somehow found yourself here without signing this. So all aspects of this event, except for the breakouts, are being recorded for asynchronous participation for those that can't join us live. It's fully closed captioned. You can show or hide these using the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen with the little CC sign. So if you hide it for you, this will only hide it for you and not for the rest of the audience. You'll be muted for the duration of the event. So if you can find yourself that you can unmute, please don't, so that we can have a nice quiet environment for our speakers. And a quick reminder to send your questions in to the questions host, who will be me very, very shortly. And also share your thoughts in the chat. We're all virtual and we can't do this live. So make sure that you're sharing what you're thinking. And again, if you have any tech issues or if I have tech issues, please tell me. So a bit about ESWN, if you're not so familiar with us. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing diversity across the geosciences, with an emphasis on creating and supporting a nurturing community, working for cultural change to eliminate barriers to a diverse scientific workforce, and empowering scientists through professional development. So it's sort of governance. So we have a board of directors and an associate board of directors. So I sit on the associate board of directors as co-chair of member events, and I work quite closely with Corinne Arden-Dreyer, who you can see here, who's also my other co-chair and super awesome. And the board is really great to work with. So now a little bit about who and what this event is a bit about. So NERC is the UK's leading public funder of environmental science. It funds research, postgraduate training and innovation within academia and research centres, has an overall budget over the next 3 years of £925 million. And the IRF itself is an early career researcher funding scheme, which provides funding for 5 years. And James will tell you a bit more about this. So why did we actually choose to host this event? So last summer, we had a member event survey, and one of the really big messages from this was that people really wanted to see more non-US funder events. So we have an annual Navigating the National Science Foundation event that we hosted in January, and that usually takes place at the American Geophysical Union fall meeting every year. But then non-US funders weren't really there, so we thought, let's reach out. The other thing is that ESWN really wants to support its early career members, which is with all of you in the audience. Also promote careers inside and outside of academia. So we hosted a couple of events on outside academia over the past 6 to 8 months. So you can find these on our YouTube thing, but we also are very aware that people want to learn more about things inside academia, which is why we're focusing on fellowships today. We also really want to set you up for IRF application success, and hopefully this will happen today. And lastly, part 2 on interviews will follow in November, so please remember to register for that when registration's open. So now to introduce today's speaker and panel. So we have James Box from NERC, who will do a short talk about the fellowship itself, and then 4 fantastic panelists that will be in our panel discussion that I'll moderate later on. So now I'm going to hand over to speakers to quickly introduce themselves. And James, would you like to go first?
Thank you very much, Matt. So I'll do a bit of an introduction in my presentation as well, but just to say hello to everyone. I'm James Box. I'm a Senior Programme Manager within Talent Skills team at NERC. My primary focus is around fellowships. So running up new calls, engaging with the community, working with cross-council schemes around fellowships. And when I was coming up with my introduction, I ran out of things to say, so I decided to mention cats because everybody loves cats, and they might make an appearance sometime later on in the presentation, so keep your eyes peeled.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. So I'm Carol Robinson. I'm a Professor of Marine Sciences at the University of East Anglia. My research focus is microbial oceanography and specifically the role of plankton in the global cycling of carbon and oxygen. I've been on the NERC Peer Review College on and off for about 20 years. And as you can see, I chaired the IRF Panel B in 21-22. I was also very fortunate to be awarded a NERC Advanced Research Fellowship around 25 years ago, which I think might actually have been the first year they were created. So it was great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Juliette Biggs, and my research uses satellite technology to study active tectonics and volcanoes. My background is I did my undergrad and PhD at Cambridge and then Oxford, and I actually decided to go to the US as a postdoctoral fellow, and I managed to get fellowships from the English-speaking union and also from the university I was going to work with to do that. I did that for 2 years before returning to the UK with a fellowship from the European Space Agency, and then I got a lectureship at the University of Bristol, where I'm now a professor. And I have a large research group, and I've recently been awarded a ERC grant. And I'm here today because I was a member of the NERC IRF panel in 2021.
Hello, so I'm Kay Huser. I'm a programme manager at NERC. So I actually sit within our strategic programme generation and delivery team. But I'm lucky enough to get the opportunity to be involved in IRF, and it's a really interesting part of my job actually, because you get to see and be quite close to the science as well. So I'm here today just to try and answer some more of those kind of internal process questions.
Hi everyone, I'm Susanna Edmeyer. I'm currently a NERC IRF at the University of Leeds. I work on how to answer questions about the activity and behaviour of volcanoes from remote sensing data. I've held my NERC IRF since 2019, but I was actually awarded in the 2017 round, so a little bit of a gap before I started. And I also hold it part-time, so I'm hoping to stay a NERC IRF for a little while longer. Relevant to the seminar today is I obviously had a successful IRF application, but also an unsuccessful one in 2015. So you could ask me about both if you like. And I currently lead a research group consisting of PhD students and a couple of PDRA positions at the University of Leeds.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for your introductions. So I'm going to actually hand over to James as he will present his talk now. And James, if you would like to take over the screen share, I will.
Thank you very much. So, again, thank you to the ESWN and to Ray and Matt for the invitation to come and speak to you all today. This is an important opportunity for NERC, for our team in Talent Skills, and for me personally to come and talk to you about the fellowship schemes that we run and try and lift some of the mystery that there is around NERC IRFs. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for taking the time to register and to turn up today. I hope you find this interesting, and welcome to UK people and to those across the globe as well. There we go. So the couple of topics that I'll cover today, I'll go through some background and introduction. So who am I, who and what is NERC, and what is an IRF? And then spend some time going through different steps within the IRF process and try and demystify some of them. So starting off with pre-submission and going all the way through the process to talk about post-award for those of you that have managed to get to that part in the process, and try and go through each of these steps in turn to give you an idea of what goes on and to try and answer some of those questions that you might have had. So a bit about me. Who am I? So I am James. Most importantly, I am a dad of two small girls, Olivia 5 and Sophie 4. My kind of academic background, as it were, is I went to University of East Anglia to do a master's degree in chemistry, and came out, moved to Swindon, looked for work in Swindon that was still in that academic area, and I don't know, half the population of Swindon seems to work at UKRI, so it was a natural fit for me. So I've been working for NERC for around 7 years now, and in my current position as the Senior Programme Manager for Fellowships for around 4 years. And I just quickly want to start this off with a little story that's kind of relevant to the pitch that I've got here. So those weird straps that you can see, that's all part of a set of equipment for doing a high ropes course. And in Easter, we took our daughter Olivia on this for the first time. So she was a little girl and going around this. And the group that we happened to be in was me with Olivia, and then another bunch of boys who were a couple of years older than her. We're going around these trees in this high ropes course, and we get to the very end, and all these boys start whizzing down the kind of zip line at the end, and Olivia's taking this all in, and looks a bit nervous. And I say to her, are you okay? Do you want to just go back down the stairs? And she turns and she looks at me and says, if the boys can do it, so can I. And there was a proud dad moment there, and the Hollywood script would have been that she just jumped straight off and zipped down, but she did get to the end and have a couple of nervous moments, but then made her way down, loved it, and proceeded to tell every single young lad down there that if boys can do it, so can I. I'm not sure they entirely understood what was going on. A couple of them looked terrified, but for me, that was a very proud dad moment where trying to instill into our two girls that if boys can do it, so can they. So enough about me. Let's go on to UKRI, NERC and the Talent Skills team. So UKRI was set up in 2018 as a kind of umbrella organisation to encompass all of the research councils that you can see on the right hand side. And the one that I work in is NERC, so the research council that funds natural environment. Just to give you an idea of how the different funding mechanisms come in and how it's split through UKRI into the different research councils. I'm glad that Ray and I have the same figure here, so 925 million over this period. So it kind of puts us at a medium-sized council on par with BBSRC, but you can see there on the whole, the amount of funding that's been made available for scientific research is enormous. To break down what the NERC core budget looks like, just to give you an idea of where it's being spent, here's a kind of a pie chart showing the different areas. So the area that I work in, Talent Skills, is this 13%, and the Talent Skills funding goes towards studentships, fellowships and training. But just to give you awareness of kind of where the rest of the funding goes into, all of this green part is to do with capital, national capability and infrastructure. So, for example, the ships, the NERC Antarctic base and other things like that. The light blue area is discovery science, so what is referred to as large grants, standard grants, and the like. And then finally, we have this orange part of the pie chart, which is all to do with future strategic research and innovation, so aligning with the issues that are either raised above by government or below by the scientific community. In terms of our structure, we have these directorates, and fellowships and talent and skills comes under this research and skills directorate, which is headed by Professor Susan Waldron. And then within this directorate, we have a number of different teams working on the nuts and bolts behind what goes on in these different areas. So you can see that within the research and skills spread out, there's the talent and skills group. And within talent and skills, as I said, we funnel our different funding via different mechanisms. So we have the responsive studentships. These are the DTPs that some of you might have gone through, or indeed through a CDT, which is a directed studentship. Some of the funding is used for training and advanced training. So the advanced training short courses call that we just ran, or for other training opportunities such as reps or policy internships. And then the final point is that fellowships angle. So we run a number of different fellowship schemes, IRF, KE, and DJT. So Daphne Jackson Trust fellowships, which is essentially return to work. And then, as promised, I have my working from home team who keep me company all day, make sure that I'm getting through everything, and generally being a bit of a pain at the moment, although with this heat, they're finding dark places to go and hide. So what about an IRF, or Independent Research Fellowships? And I must apologise now, I'm a civil servant, work for government. I use a lot of acronyms, so I will try and make sure that each of them is explained properly. It's part and parcel of working for the civil service is that everything turns into an acronym. So apologies if they're not all entirely clear. But anyway, so IRF is our 5-year funded fellowship scheme, which can be done full-time or flexible or part-time to a minimum of 50% of your working hours. And essentially, it's our method of identifying and supporting environmental science scientists who are looking to pioneer their particular area. It's a prestigious award with a proven track record of developing early career researchers to the point where, when we did a review into the impact of IRF on an academic career, we found that those who had completed their IRF, at the time we conducted this review, 100% of those who had completed their IRF, so gone through the full 5-year, had achieved full-time academic employment, something that we saw as a real strength to the scheme, and something that we're very proud of. In terms of funding available for IRF then, so approximately 7.4 million is available for this call. That can go up or down. We have a pot available to us, but generally we have a kind of ring-fenced figure of about 7.4, depending on other funding opportunities we have available to us. And we look to fund between 11 and 13 fellowships per year, depending on the cost of those that are at the top of the list, and try and fund as many as we possibly can. So this year's call, the 2020 call, will go live shortly, and details of that can be found via the UKRI funding finder page, which I've got a bit of an explanation around it. But essentially, all funding opportunities go through the UKRI funding finder system now. So hopefully now that's given you a bit of a background around NERC, around IRF. And the next part of this talk is about deconstructing each of the processes that yourself and we and the panels go through as part of an IRF process, so kind of just taking you through the journey. So the first part of that journey is the pre-submission stage. So, what does that mean? That's essentially anything that happens before the closing date, before your application is submitted to us. So the funding finder call will go live. And if you go into the funding finder webpage, you can see there's a way of filtering based on the council that you're looking for. So if you're in an interdisciplinary area, then you could go and search for multiple councils, and you can also filter by the type of grant available, whether it's a normal grant, a fellowship, or some other opportunity, because some of these have different rules and apply to different groups. So once you've found that call that's relevant to you, and it might not be IRF, this can apply to another of the calls that could pique your interest, so just be aware of that. So first things first, you need to have the idea for a proposal. And it's worth pointing out that ideas for proposals should be drafted, different ones, before those calls come out. So have a couple of different proposals in your back pocket, different aims and objectives that you can work up when a call comes around. For IRF, we don't tie it to a particular strategy, so it can be across any remit within NERC. But be aware that there are calls that are released by NERC, particularly from the strategic program side, where it will be aligned to a specific strategy. And it's really an opportunity for you to look at those and try and tie your area of science into those into the strategy behind the call. So when you've got this idea that you want to put forward to proposal, there are a number of things and people that you need to make sure that you talk to before the proposal is submitted. It's worth saying here that this might be a proposal that you might not submit this round, but it was already worth thinking about it in terms of next round if you don't think you're prepared for this one that's coming up now. Things that you'll need to do is talk to your host institute or an institute that you want to host for you. So each of the fellowships needs to be hosted at an eligible institute. So these are usually UK funded universities or centres, or there are some extended charities such as RSPB or places like the Natural History Museum. It's all on the website, so don't panic. In terms of choosing a host institute, in the past for fellowships, we've been keen, rightly or wrongly, to say that mobility is a great way to show independence. We are no longer going down that route. We haven't done so for a number of years. We see mobility as being a method of finding and proving independence, but for us, there's so many other reasons behind choosing a host institute that you don't have to go into detail. When you choose a host institute, you know that it's whatever is suitable for you. Make sure that you talk to your collaborators, your project partners. So these are people that will be involved in the call at some point, whether supporting you, providing you access to data, expertise, training. Just make sure that you engage with them, you bring them along with the ride, on the ride. Make sure they are supporting you and your application. If you need to use things like ship time, go to the BAS Antarctic logistics, use NERC facilities, make sure all of that is done in plenty of time as well. And when the call text comes out, it sounds like a bit of a silly thing to say, please do make sure that you read it. We do get lots of questions where the quick answer is just go and read the call text. We will make sure that we clarify everything for you, but nothing is hidden. Everything should be in the call text. If it's not, it's just generally the grey areas that are hidden away in some other document. But in terms of the reason for the call and the criteria, that will all be in the call text. Something to note here is that we're bringing in resume for researcher CVs for IRF. So we're moving away from the standardized, very data-driven templates that we had before, moving into this new narrative CV approach to try and make sure that we make this process as equal and as diverse as possible. A really key thing to note here is that when you are going through the process of submitting, make sure you leave enough time for your internal hosts processes. So as part of an application, they might have internal checks, internal deadlines that may be weeks before the call deadline. So just make sure you talk to your host, make sure that you're aware of those deadlines. And if you do have any problems, do ask for help, including NERC. We have plenty of people ask for clarifications, for assistance, and we're always happy to make sure that anyone who has any problems that we can respond to you. And also make sure that you talk to your host institutes. If you know anyone that has applied or has been awarded a NERC fellowship in the past, go and talk to them. In terms of the criteria then, as I said, when you read through the call text, it's all on there. And one of the things that we try and stress is that the primary criteria for IRF is the suitability of the applicant. We are looking for the next generation of environmental science pioneers. We are looking for those who show they have excellent research achievements, they have the ability to advance their area, they can work independently, they've got these big ideas, they can lead a team and so on. So make sure that when you put in your application, you are following the criteria, you're making sure you give yourself enough time and enough space in your application to really talk up yourself as an applicant. Show the panel, show the reviewers why you should be invested in, why NERC should invest in you. These are the parts of the criteria come secondary. It's all about the applicant. So once the applications have been submitted, the call close date has come off, everything will then go internally to NERC, and essentially we go through a number of processes, a number of internal checks. This is done both by kind of the UKRI grants team, but also our own grants team. And these checks include things like remit and resubmissions. So in terms of remit, is the proposal that you've submitted to NERC part of NERC remit? If you're unsure about whether your proposal is within NERC remit, you can ask us beforehand, and there is a process for dealing with that. If we have an application that is submitted to us where we're not sure, there is a process there again. Essentially what we do is there's a minimum of kind of 50% remit to hit with a research council. If you get above that 50% remit tick box, then it will stay within that council. If there's some grey area, we will talk to the other councils where we think the remit might be. And as part of those discussions, we will decide which council will take ownership of it. If no other councils will take it, it will default back to the original research council. So don't worry, we won't have a situation where somebody won't have a research council that will take responsibility. It will always default back to the council where it was originally submitted. So in this case, NERC. For those where it is interdisciplinary, and I think there was a question about this that was submitted beforehand, we will ensure that we go to reviewers who match your expertise and the remit of the application. We will also try and get recommended reviewers from other research councils where they have more expertise. But just to be aware that there are some difficulties in this process where it's quite a lengthy process to try and obtain council expertise on other reviewers. And when we do go to reviewers outside of NERC expertise, there is a longer dialogue that needs to be taken place with them, because many people see a request for review from NERC, and let's say they're from the social sciences, their immediate response will be to reject that and say it's got nothing to do with me. So it does take a little bit more of dialogue to reassure them that what they're doing does have worth and that they are providing something that is going to be relevant and used within the process. Other checks we do, so resubmission, this is just to make sure that we're not reviewing two applications at the same time that are going through that have the same aims, to avoid A, reviewer burnout, and B, to avoid the situation where we end up double awarding the same grant. Other checks that we'll do is look at resource requested, make sure they're all correct, make sure that the correct facilities forms are there, make sure that if you requested ship time or air time, that you've gone through the correct processes there, and then just make sure that the wider submission rules have been followed. To note, we are lenient. We understand that for some of you, this might be your first application, and we will work with you to make sure if there's any errors that they can be sorted out. That will be to a point. At some point, rules will have been broken, such as, doubling the length of a case for support. We can't deal with that. That will end up being rejected, but they are very, very rare. We will prefer to work with you to make sure that everybody gets their chance, as I said, particularly for something where it's an early career researcher call. And for some of you, it might be the first time of submitting. Once all of those checks have been done, so one thing to note from the previous slide, once all those checks have been done, we then divide the proposals into the different panels. Previously, this was applicant nominated, and we had the 3 panels. And this worked well until everybody started submitting into panel C. So this was around biology, genetics, and those types of things. And we actually had 1 year where there were more applications in panel C than there were in panel A and B combined, which creates all sorts of issues, whether it's internal resource issues, external peer review issues, going through to panel and so on. It just created issues at all points. The way we tried to tackle this is that we said, okay, let's try and smooth out where these applications go into. So as part of this, we run applications through something called dimensions, and this gives us essentially a machine learning outcome, which is that it goes through each application and gives kind of areas of topics for each of these applications, and then we will group them as best we can into the 3 panels. The 3 panels are still generally based off the way they were before. So kind of panel A, the more physical environmental sciences like volcanology and earthquakes and those types of things. And then panel B will have a bit more chemistry in it and kind of atmospherics and things like that. And then panel C is still primarily biology and genetics. But where there's a clear grouping of proposals that would have been split across 2 panels beforehand, the aim is to move them into different panels to ensure that across the 3 panels, it's a lot cleaner, a lot more evenly spread, and to ensure that if we have expertise in the panel, it matches more accurately the proposals that are within that. So if previously you had submitted an application that went into panel B for whatever reason and it ended up on panel A, do not panic. This is better for you. It makes sure that you are with a group of proposals that are more like yours and is more likely to have a panel member who has expertise more closely aligned to you. So that's just to give you the inside of how we organize those panels and make sure that they're more even, they're more fair. Once we've got past this point, we then go into peer review, which, as I put here, is the lengthiest stage of any call process. It is a beast of a process where each of the proposals that comes in will need to be internationally peer reviewed by at least 3 experts. Bearing in mind that for IRF, we see about 150 submissions per year, and the hit rate on peer review being accepted by international peer reviewers ranges from 30% hit rate to 10% hit rate. So that just gives you the idea of the number of people that we have to go to per proposal to get those reviews. Things that you can help us out with here: for each proposal, we can go to a nominated reviewer. So this is a person or a group of people that you will submit, giving us an idea of people who are most aligned with your application, who are most likely to be available. But we also have our use is the NERC College of Reviewers. So this is a UK group of NERC academics who have signed up essentially to say that they will be available during certain times of the year to be on hand to help us out with the peer review process. When they're reviewing your proposal, they will review across all the criteria. So the primary criteria, the applicant, and then the secondary criteria is the science, the EDI, and the host support. When each proposal has received hopefully its minimum of 3 reviews, these are all collated, and we then go through to a stage of the process called the SIFT panel. So for each of these, a panel will conduct a SIFT, and essentially it is to choose a group within their panel that they believe have the highest chance of succeeding at interview. Essentially, it goes through a yes/no binary scoring system of yes, this person is competitive enough to go through to interview, or not, rejection at this part of the process. The panels that we have for this are relatively small in size. So it'll be between 6 and 7 people and then a chair. So we try and get a broad range of expertise, but just be aware this might not cover everything. But that is why we have the peer review system, to make sure that each proposal has had the experts that are closely aligned with the expertise to review and provide comments. The panel act as a moderating panel, so they're not an assessment panel. They will look at the comments that the reviewers have been provided, and they will be able to moderate them. They'll be able to say whether they are accurate, fair. Sometimes panel members will say that certain reviewer comments should be discredited if they are incorrect or over enthusiastic, let's put it that way. And in some of these situations where panel members have identified potential unconscious bias, which is an important part of our process, and will recommend that certain reviewer comments are essentially ignored for the process of moderating and deciding whether somebody goes through to sift. So if when you see your reviewer comments, you might have an additional note to say that the panel members have discredited or would like to just note that they thought a particular reviewer was slightly over enthusiastic with some of their comments or so on. But yeah, to note that they don't just take everything on face value. There is some method about how they use their comments. To give you an idea of how much is sifted, we see the threshold of submissions to panels to invitation to interview as being around 20%. So those that get into the top 20% will then go through to interview. If you aren't part of the top 20%, that's not to say that your proposal was bad. It's just to say that in the grand scheme of the applications that were seen in that round, you were not in the top 20%. I won't go into the interview in too much detail, but I thought it'd be worth just going through every stage of the process anyway. So the interview is really an opportunity for panel members to meet applicants, to provide clarifications over certain points and just have a general discussion with them. It is not another opportunity to really grill them, to provide another review. It's really to make sure that the applicant comes in and has the best opportunity to discuss and to show why they are someone that NERC should be investing in. And the process goes through a 10-minute presentation around the proposal and around the applicant, and then followed by questions. And these questions are based on the criteria. So be prepared for questions on yourself as an applicant, the science that you'll be doing, around EDI and around a host institute. Just to note here that we are continuing to conduct online. We started conducting some of our interviews online pre-pandemic, and I think that the pandemic forced our hand with the way that we should be doing this, and given how much success that we've had from it, how much easier it makes it for people not having to travel and so on, and particularly for those who have other caring responsibilities and can't take an entire day away to travel to Swindon. We want to keep continuing to conduct interviews online until there is a strong consensus from applicants and panel members that going back to in-person interviews will be the best method. But at the moment, we will continue to do it online. And just to say again, the success rate at interview is around 20%. So just to take those figures into consideration, as I said at the beginning, on the whole, we see application rates of around 150, give or take 10 to 20. And the success rate is around 11 to 13. So overall, we see the success rate of applications to be around the 10% mark, give or take, throughout the years. For those of you that are part of that group of 11 to 13 awardees, as part of the post-award process, you'll be contacted by the NERC Fellowships team to let you know of the opportunity available to you. Some don't accept the award. Some, quite often, we're running this at the same time as other fellowship schemes that are going on, such as the Royal Society Fellowship Scheme. So we give you a length of time to decide whether this is the route that you want to go down. If so, then we'll start organising the award letter and the start date. the start date that you put in the application is not set in stone. Things change, I don't know, weekly, monthly, and over the however many months it is, 6-month process between submission and the award process, things may have changed and your start date might have to change. Don't worry, that's absolutely fine. We can change the start date. Something else to note is that the institute that you choose at the point of application does not have to be set in stone as well. We quite often see fellows that are awarded use an IRF as an opportunity and a kind of golden ticket to go to other institutes. And if that is the case, then that's absolutely fine, and we encourage it, whatever works best for you. So as part of that, we will work with you to make sure that your grant is set up at that new institute. And to give you an idea on figures, we generally see between 2 or 3 fellows each year immediately move to a new institute to start their fellowship. We'll also talk to you through the reporting and grant requirements. Generally for IRF, we like to keep reporting quite low. Generally, the feedback on this is very good. I think fellows like just getting on with the work that they are doing and not being harassed by us for constant reports and evaluations and those types of things. So we acknowledge that. We just ask for the general reporting that goes on, and we don't really get too involved about asking for more information from you. So that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully I kept some sort of time, and hopefully that kind of lifted some of the mist on IRF. If there's any questions around it, I can see there's loads in the chat box. I haven't opened them up, so I haven't seen what they're like yet, but I'm around for the kind of breakout sessions later on, so please do come and ask me, or email the fellowships mailbox below, where that will be monitored, and we'll try and respond to you as much as possible. But thank you again for the invitation. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of this event.
Thanks so much, James. That was really great. So I'm just going to quickly take over the screen share from you and introduce the next part of the event. So thanks so much for sending your questions in through the registration form and the chat. We're now going to move into the panel discussion. So there were a lot of questions, but we found some common themes. So we've narrowed it down into some key questions within 7 different themes. The leading questions will be pasted in the chat so that you can follow along with each part of the discussion. And just to remind you that there will be an opportunity to ask more questions in the breakouts. So definitely either send them through to us and we'll try to get them through to the panel, but also if you don't get your question answered, remember to go along to your preferred panelist and go and talk to them. So the first theme that we have is essentially the pre-application process. So what should be considered before applying for an IRF, if there's any internal departmental processes that should be taken into account, and also what's different about the IRF to other fellowship schemes. And to start us off with this, we have Suzanne.
So I think one thing that the NERC IRF has in common with other fellowships is I think the easiest way to approach writing it is to try and write from one big idea or one big common theme. And I personally always found it easier to come up with lots of little ideas. And the challenge was trying to find something unifying that would bring them together. And I think if you can do that, it makes the rest of the process much easier. In comparison to other fellowships that I've done, and I think I've done 3 other types, so Liebe Human Trust Royal Society, ESA Living Planet, as well as some kind of individual institution ones, you actually have an awful lot more space to talk about the science in the NERC IRF application, in your case for support, than in other schemes. So you really have the opportunity to develop ideas, but that means your ideas have to be well enough to develop to back up the space that you're spending writing about them. So I think it's important not to underestimate how long that takes, in my experience. And I definitely got better at that the more fellowship applications that I wrote, because I think it's something that takes practice. And I I think the best way to work out what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong is to get feedback from people who aren't necessarily in your field, who just look at your science ideas and kind of have a general impression of whether it's interesting or important, and can give you that feedback and whether you're writing about it in the right way or not.
Thank you so much for sharing. Juliet, would you also like to come in on this question?
Sure, yes. So I've got quite a lot of experience with advising members of my research group who are thinking about these kind of processes. And I guess the first question I always ask them is why do you want to do a fellowship in the first place? I think some people feel there's an obligation to do a fellowship because they've spent a certain amount of time doing a PhD or a postdoc, and this is the next step in their career. Or they think that a NERC fellowship is the only way to get an academic career. And I think those are not necessarily the best reasons for applying for a NERC fellowship. So, academia isn't the only career path. And even if you spent a lot of time on a PhD and a postdoc, you should go and do whatever makes you happy. And if that's a fellowship, that's fantastic. If it's something else, then you should totally go and do that. And don't worry what your supervisors or your colleagues or anybody else is telling you. And if you if you do want to do a fellowship, you should actually look at all the schemes out there. So the NERC fellowships are fantastic. What they offer is really special, but they aren't the only scheme out there. And there may be other schemes that are more in your more specialist to your field of study that actually would be have a higher success rate. And you should not necessarily do those instead of a NERC IRF, but always think about whether you should put out applications to those kind of schemes as well. And then the next thing to think is, if you decide that NERC IRF is what you want, is this the right time in your career to be doing it? So as a panelist, we often see people who have really maybe applied a little bit too early. Their ideas aren't well enough developed. Do you need a little more time to develop that big idea? Having said that, there are also people who leave it too late. Sometimes it can take a couple of years to really develop the ideas and get things together. And if you only start this in your final year of eligibility, then you've sort of already given yourself a mountain to climb. So I think, is this the right year? Should I wait another year, or should I go for it now? Bearing in mind it might take a few years. The process might take a few years. So then you also need a good idea, and you need to think about the appropriate host. And we've heard James talk a little bit about mobility. And so obviously that's not a requirement anymore, but you want to be able to justify the host and justify to yourself as well as to NERC why this is the appropriate place. So the only consideration, the research is an important consideration, but it's not the only consideration for your choice of host. So I think those are the things that I encourage people to sit down and do before they even decide to write an application. Once you've decided to write one, decided on your host, then obviously the first thing to do is to approach your host. And I would normally advise people to approach an academic with kind of overlapping research interests in that host, because they're best placed to champion you and to guide you through the internal processes.
Great, thank you so much. Would any other panelists like to contribute?
I was just going to mention that one of the questions is about internal departmental processes, and I would just encourage you to talk to people within the host department, because sometimes they have a sort of a mentoring scheme and they put together people who are looking to prepare themselves for a fellowship proposal, and then there's academic members of staff who could mentor. So as Juliet says, definitely contact the people within your host institute and see if there's this sort of mentoring and helping with giving feedback and practicing interviews and that sort of thing.
Awesome, thank you so much. Do any other panelists have any other contributions, or shall we move on to the next theme? All good? Okay, cool. So the next theme is the application. So how do you go about starting your IRF application? How much time should an applicant set aside to write an application? What things should an applicant include and highlight in their application? What do panelists most value in an application, and what should applicants prioritize? What extracurricular activities such as editor roles or EDI strengthen an application, and how does an applicant demonstrate they are becoming a future leader? And to start us off, Susanna, would you like to go first?
Okay, that's a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to take them slowly and break them down a bit. I think from like a good first practical step, like after you've identified a host institution and you've worked out what all of their internal processes are, which can sometimes be many, many months before the deadline, is to start talking about your science ideas to other people and see if they seem convinced by them or not. See if you can actually convince yourself that they're good ideas before you jump in and do the writing, and then start to work out the detail and kind of break it down into smaller sections. A lot of people use work packages to divide up a large research program that you plan to do over 5 years. And I think that's quite a helpful approach, though of course there's lots of different ways to do it. But I think the best advice that I got when I was doing lots of fellowship applications was to think about the narrative of the application. So it's not enough just to try and persuade people that you're good at, like, technically the thing that you want to do for the next 5 years. You also have to explain why it's the right science to be done now, why it's important. It's an important question in terms of the context of other people's research and the state of the field generally, and then why you're the right person to do it. So, I mean, it's a hard thing to do, and of course nobody's career actually kind of, you know, goes like that. You don't have a kind of plan and a path, and people tend to just follow things that are interesting. But if you can write your fellowship proposal in a way that demonstrates that everything that you've done so far has placed you perfectly to do the research that you want to do, then I think that helps your case. So for example, you might want to think about using your description of your past work to demonstrate that you've got the right skills to answer the question, or that you've understood the kind of the breadth of the scientific field sufficiently to tackle something from different angles. But bring it all back to a kind of personal narrative about your career and your research interests, I think is really helpful, and also kind of helps you pull together something which is quite a kind of large document and quite complicated into something that's more readable and has a kind of internal narrative and structure to it. I was kind of thinking about the other aspects of the question because there were lots of parts of it. There's a comment about extracurriculars, and I think that if you're going to bring in evidence of lots of other things that you've done, you know, if they're valuable, it's important to try and attach them to that narrative of why you want to do this research and why you're well equipped to do it. So particularly evidence of leadership, evidence of relevant kind of technical skills, and of strong collaboration, I think is helpful. But anything that you add into your application, you want to make part of the overall picture.
Great, thank you so much. Carol, would you also like to join in?
Sure, I think that's really excellent advice from Susanna. I would also advocate that you start to do this as early as possible, but it's something that is you're reflecting on where you want to be, the narrative of what you want to achieve, and how this fits into the long-term plan of your career. And it should be something that you could be mentored with, that you reflect on every year as part of some sort of mentoring or appraisal system, to look at, you know, what are the skills and experience that you have, and what are those that you want to develop over the next year in preparation for an application. And as Susanna said, look really carefully at the criteria of each fellowship that you're going for. So particularly think about evidence of leadership. Is there something that you have done independently of your supervisor or your research team? Is there a connection that you've made with a collaborator? Is there a working group that you're sitting on? There were some examples of editing or reviewing, because part of the criteria is to show your excellence, and therefore that the science that you're doing has had some influence on something else. So you can look at the metrics of who has used your publication, your piece of work in some other sphere. How many times has it been cited? Is there a patent? Have you seen somebody use your method in a different way? So think about the impact or the influence that your work has had, and what are the ideas that you've been putting forward independently of other people. So think about leadership, research excellence, independence. And I guess that means that this is going to take a while. It's not something you can do in a few weeks. It's something that you've been preparing and you're reflecting on your career progression over months to years. Look really carefully at the science and think about what are the risks, what could not work, and therefore what would be your plan B. So in writing your proposal, you need to be up at the big picture. How does my research influence global science? But also down at the detail of what would I do if this particular method didn't work, or this particular ship didn't go to the place that I wanted to? And how has your previous experience of coping with things that change, how is that transferable to be able to make sure that the research that you're proposing is tractable, is going to happen? What else? So yes, the extracurriculars, I think that's evidence of something that you've done independently, and anything can count toward that. I'm not sure that there's anything that's more important than others. As Susanna says, it fits into your narrative of you have chosen to do something, you've taken your ideas, and you've done it for a reason, because it's helped you to gain a particular skill or some experience that is going to help you in the research and the future leadership role that you're looking for. Hope that helps.
That's all really great advice. Thanks so much. Would any other panelists like to join in for this question?
Yeah, I think maybe I could address the question of what panelists most value in an application, because actually what the reviewers value and what the panelists value is significantly different. And to be successful, you have to write your application to appeal to both the reviewers and the panelists. So when I've been a reviewer, it's usually in a field that I'm quite familiar with. So I kind of have a general idea already of why this field is important. And what I'm looking for is somebody with kind of a novel and independent idea. They're not just continuing work that their supervisor has done or just applying the same method to a new place. I want to see some novel contribution. But as a reviewer, I'm really also looking into, is this work feasible? Can it be done? Do I think it's possible? Are the data sets and methods at a stage where this is doable? And I'm providing a review on that. As a panelist, my view is quite different. It's quite possible that this proposal is not in an area I'm particularly familiar with. So I want to see that they have identified a kind of a really interesting research area and that they fit within that. And I will rely quite heavily on the reviewers to provide me with information about whether this is really technically feasible or not. So you have to appeal to quite a broad audience with different levels of expertise to write a successful proposal.
Great, thanks so much. Do any other panelists have any last points before we move on to the next theme? Oh, okay.
I could make one quick comment, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I really hate the word extracurricular. Things like reviewing, that's not extracurricular. It's part of being part of the scientific community. And we do it, one thing we look for is people who are going to be future leaders. And if you're going to be a leader, you have to be part of the community. So I would advise to avoid the term extracurricular, particularly if I'm going to be on the panel.
Very good point. Awesome. So I will move on to theme 3. So theme 3 is the next point of an IR application's journey. And when it hits the NERC office. So what actually happens when the application reaches the NERC office, how many program managers actually handle an application and how are they managed? How are reviewers chosen? How is the panel formed? What happens when reviews are received? And what is actually in an IRF review? So I know James has covered very tiny points of this, but Kay's going to help us with this one. So Kay, would you like to go?
Yeah, so as you said, James has touched on this slightly, but so as soon as the application arrives, there are a number of different checks that have to go on. So there's the checks that are carried out more on the side of eligibility of institute and the person that's applying, and also, have you got the right attachments and page numbers and font sizes? They're all checked. And then on the other side, there's much more. So that's where the program managers come in and start checking the remit. Does it fit with NERC remit, or is it, does it sit better with another research council? Sort of what, or potentially sort of the percentage of it fitting into another research council. So we check that. So if we think it sort of 30% of it fits with ESRC, we'll then approach them and check that with them. And that's where they can sort of help us with reviewer selections. So that's kind of that part of it. And then, so we then divide those into the panels. As James said, we've got a slightly different process where we try to even out and match where we think the proposals will be best grouped together so that we can get the right expertise in the different moderating panels. So we divide the kind of the way that the proposals are managed. So once we've got those panels sort of agreed and decided between us, we have a lead program manager who takes responsibility for those panels, and we usually have another 2 program managers, if we're lucky, to support us. And we also have assistant program managers supporting the lead program manager. So they're really, really helpful to us in keeping a check on the reviews and chasing if we haven't had any responses. So I think that covers that sort of question there. And then we then sort of go on to the reviewer choices. So we do this. So first of all, we actually look through our peer review college membership, and we try to select where we can free reviewers from that college. There's a range of sort of expertise that we have in that college, and then we go on to invite external reviewers to make sure we're getting the right spread of expertise across the proposal, and that's just a continual process until we make sure we can secure at least 3 reviews, but we always try to aim for 4 reviews where we can, just because we know that people are busy and it can be difficult securing reviewers. So there's always that contingency process kind of in the background to make sure we get those reviews for each of the proposals. And then going on to how we form the panel. So it's similar. We start with our peer review college, and we select from there the relevant expertise across the panels, obviously across the proposals that we have. Obviously, given the number of proposals and the number of people that we can have on the panel, we have to really sort of look at the people that have those really sort of broad kind of overarching expertise, but also the peer review college are all sort of have the kind of training or knowledge about being a panel member. So it's really useful to start with them. And then if we feel there's any expertise that are missing, we will then go out to external members in the community to make sure that we cover those expertise. So when the reviews actually come in, so the programme managers do look at those. We check that they are good reviews, that they are of a length that is, that they're constructive, that they would be useful. We don't want to just have 2 sentences, this is a great proposal. We try to look a bit more and see, whether are they constructive, and not just sort of saying how wonderful the proposal is, or on the other side how bad the proposal is. It has to be, we try to look for those where they're really pulling out kind of where maybe the weaknesses or where the strengths are in the proposal. So that's kind of gone into a bit that what's in the review, but it looks at not just the science or research excellence, it's also looking at the person. They provide their feedback on the kind of information that you've provided as your sort of personal record. And also they do tend to look at like the resources, like in the proposal, does it look about right, and how you've costed time and for equipment and things like that. So I think that covers all of those questions there.
Great, thank you so much for covering all the NERC stuff. Do any other panelists have any other parts that they'd like to add before we move on? No? Okay, awesome. So now we take the application to the next stage of its journey, to the SIFT panel. So what is a moderation panel, and what happens at the SIFT, and what happens after the SIFT panel? And Kay and Juliet are going to help us with this one. And Kay, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, so moderation panel is usually made up of around sort of 6 to 7 members. It depends again on the spread of proposals. It can be slightly more. And then basically they look at the proposals and also the reviews, and take all of that information in front of them into consideration. And then so that's kind of all done sort of prior to the SIFT. And then there's this, at the SIFT meeting, there's this sort of checking of have the panel made the right decision in that the proposal should go forward to interview, or if it should be sifted out. So there's that. So they don't bring kind of any new information as such into the discussions. It's based on what's presented in front of them, and then that's where they kind of make this list then of the proposals that should go to the next stage. And then obviously after that we then inform everyone about the outcome of that SIFT meeting, so whether they go on to the next stage or whether that unfortunately it hasn't been quite made it this time. So then after that we then prepare sort of any feedback that the panel have provided. Obviously this can't be done for all of them, but it's just where again where James mentioned about where reviews maybe made some comments where the panel might have not might have disregarded, or just any recommendations they feel like if it's just nearly there but just needs that extra kind of push for the kind of next stage. I think that's probably from my side. I think probably actual panel members will probably be able to provide a bit more of their kind of insight as well.
Sure, yes, I think I'm up next. So I was on the SIFT panel a couple of years ago, and it's actually quite overwhelming. You get sent this enormous pile of paperwork from NERC and a big spreadsheet to fill out. So the year I did it, I look back, there was about 40 proposals in our panel, which actually seems, from what James said earlier, maybe that's less than average. Maybe some panels have more than that. And they have a system of introducers. So each proposal is assigned 3 people who will read it carefully. So I tend to start with those ones, and then I sort of flick through the others as well, just so I know what's being discussed. So the goal of the SIFT is to come out with this binary shortlist or not. But actually, when I first read them through, I tend to have 4 categories. So there's some that have amazing reviews, and I don't even need to look at those in much detail because I know I'm going to come back to them for the interviewed panel. So I usually put those down as shortlist. At the other end, there are some that have all the reviewers agree that these proposals kind of aren't up to standard. And similarly, I don't tend to spend a huge amount of time reading those, but there aren't that many of those, I would say. And then I have 2 other categories, which is borderline shortlist and borderline reject. And I would say the vast majority of proposals fall into these middle categories. And that's what makes it so difficult. So at this SIFT stage, as I say, I'm a panelist, so I'm quite broad, and a lot of the proposals don't align very accurately with my area very closely with my area of personal expertise. So I tend to pay most attention to the beginning parts of the proposal, where the person is laying out their research vision. I'm trying to get a sense of the person and whether they're a leader. I must admit, I would probably read through some of the details of those work packages, and actually look to the external reviews to comment on those. Now, as we've heard, not all reviews are good. They're not, and we don't weight them all equally. And even after NERC has been through and removed some bad ones, there are some that I either disagree with, or I think they have a personal axe to grind, or something like that. But I look through those to see if they've picked out questions, and sometimes they could be very positive about a method, but say, oh, but they haven't mentioned this, and then I'll remember that. So this is a good method, but I should remember to think about this for later stages. So just because they have some criticisms doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad proposal. It may just mean that there's something that we would want to clarify later. So I use that to come up with the borderline shortlist or borderline reject, and then the next stage is actually the panel itself. And we submit those scores in advance, I should say. So we do have to decide before the meeting, and there's quite strict deadlines, and you will get hounded if you haven't submitted your pre-scores. Then at that point, there's 3 people who will have read the proposal in detail. Usually the chair's had a decent look at all of them, and there might be somebody else who for this proposal caught their eye. So there's usually kind of somewhere between 3 and 5 people who have a good idea about each proposal. And then they can discuss it. They can discuss their strengths and weaknesses, and hopefully come to some kind of consensus and try and put the proposals in order. And then the final stage of the SIFT really is to work out where the line is going to be drawn, because there's in an ideal world there'll be 2 very distinct groups, but actually there's not. There's a sliding scale. And the line has to be put somewhere, and it's that is one of the biggest challenges, I think, is because it's such a binary decision to invite people for interview or not, whereas actually the proposals that are close to that borderline are usually very similar and hard to distinguish between them. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Okay, if no one has anything, so we're actually going to go down to 6 themes because I know that we're behind time. So theme 5 is about IRF policies and applicant requests and needs. So how are career breaks taken into account during panel discussions and IRF eligibility? And for this, James is actually going to type a response in the chat. And secondly, can IRF applicants request flexible and or part-time working arrangements? And Susanna is going to help us out with this one.
Yeah, and it's a quick answer, and the answer is yes. And obviously that has to be discussed as well with your host institution, but it's possible to hold an IRF part-time, and I think James actually mentioned that in his presentation, and to work flexibly. So I've since my son was born, I've worked at 60%, and there's been no issue with that at all. So I think it's something that the NERC IRF isn't advertised specifically as a kind of flexible working fellowship, unlike some others out there. But I would say it's comparable with, for example, the Royal Society ones, which are particularly kind of advertised as being accessible and part-time working. Does anyone want to add anything?
Okay, great, thanks so much. So James is posting some responses in the chat for theme 5. Theme 6 is the panel structure and what the role of a panelist is versus the chair. And for this one, Kay and Carol are going to help us out. So Kay, would you like to join?
Yeah, so I guess we've touched a little bit on this. So yeah, the panel members are very much there to really look through those proposals in great sort of detail, and also looking and taking those reviews into consideration, to be able to come up with that short list, and then as we of proposals that go to interview stage, and then they then form the panel at the interview stage as well. So there's that kind of added role where they look at setting the questions for the interview stage as well. So the chair is more there to, obviously I think they have a big job where they have to look at all of the proposals and have some understanding of what's in all of those proposals and the reviews. So kind of just making sure that everyone on that panel has the opportunity to present, what they think, of the proposal, and to make sure that, if there are kind of any differences sort of in opinions across the panel, to just come to some kind of consensus on the proposal. And I think it's just also making sure that the process is fair and consistent as well, and also that it's not NERC making that decision. It is it comes from, we're just there in the background checking that the panel runs. So it kind of takes away that it's not, it's nothing, a decision is actually made through the research community, really. I'll pass over to Carol because she's a chair, so she'll have a really, her insights.
Thanks, Kay. So I guess I see the chair as a bit of a conductor of an orchestra. So the chair has to have an overview perspective. The chair will have read all of the applications and tried to review them at some level. However, the panelists have gone into great detail with the number of applications that they've been allocated. So at the beginning of the meeting, the chair needs to make sure that all of the panelists are familiar with exactly what we're going to do, and to make sure that we focus on the criteria. And sometimes there are panel members that have lots and lots of experience, and sometimes there's a panel member that's just new to the process. So we need to make sure that everyone feels comfortable before they start about what's going to happen. We need to remind the panelists about the conflict of interest policy. So it may be that there's been a range of opportunities for the panel members to be able to say, I'm sorry, I'm conflicted in this because there's a link with my institution, for example. And it may be that when you've read the whole of the application, you find that there's a project partner that you hadn't really realized was something connected to your institute. So the chair has to remind the panel about the conflict of interest policy, and if there is something like that, then they would have to go through the policy and work out that that particular conflicted member was out of the room, out of the Zoom room, when we talked about that proposal. The chair needs to make sure that all the panelists realize that what's happening is confidential, and they cannot go back to their institutes and give out any information about any of the applications that they've been party to. We also need at the moment to take consideration of the impact of COVID. So obviously that this has had a big impact on applicants' ability to do some field work or some practical work, and we need to have that at the forefront of our minds at the moment. And we also need to remind the panelists that they can only assess the information that's on the application form. So they cannot bring into the conversation information that they might know from hearing from somebody else. So the chair really has to make sure that all of those things are occurring in a fair, equitable way during the SIF panel. So as Julie has said, for each application, there'll be at least 3 panelists who have read it very, very carefully. So the chair, there'll be an allocated amount of time per application, and the chair will first of all invite the first panelist to give their overview of that application, then the second panelist, then the third panelist, then anyone else on the panel who has some expertise that they can contribute, and then bring the panelists to a consensus decision on each of the applications. And as Juliet also says, at the end, there are usually a number of applicants who are on that borderline, and the chair really needs to be provocative in order to help the panel compare apples and pears and try and rank who falls over the borderline into being on the interview list and who doesn't, because there's only a finite amount of time. It's usually 2 days for the interviews, so there's a limit to how many people we can interview. So I guess the chair has that overall perspective, they're reflecting and watching and observing what's happening, because after the interview stage, they do have to report back to NERC on how they felt the whole process went and what things we could do to improve next time. And they have to make sure that all the applications get a fair reading, and that we're consistent in the way that we approach that reviewing throughout the time of the panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All really useful insights into demystifying this whole process. So thank you so much for a great panel discussion.